Well, apparently France has just come through its third heat wave and there's a fourth one on its way. If you've been watching the international news, you could well be forgiven for believing that the whole of France is burning. It isn't. Yes, there are fires, and yes, some of them are pretty serious, but it's far from being the whole of France. Many are relatively small, from a couple of hectares to 20, 30 hectares of land being lost. And there is some exceptional ones which suddenly explode into several thousands of hectares. I'm redoing the intro because this video was supposed to come out last week. But before I could release it, the fires just outside Bordeaux and Biscarrosse grew to such a dramatic level. Out of respect for those concerned, I decided to actually delay the video. When I was going to release this, the actual fire outside Bordeaux was just over 12,500 hectares burnt. They have now got it under control at 42,000 hectares. That is like the size of Paris city. But what is the most surprising of all is that it is no longer confined to just the south of France. We are getting big fires now where we wouldn't have expected them 10 years ago. Just a week or two ago, there was over 2,000 hectares lost in the Fontainebleau forest, which is just outside of Paris. In fact, this year, we are mid-July, and there is already over 50,000 hectares which have literally gone up in smoke. That is more than the total of last year. And like I said, we're only the 15th of July. Most of summer is still to come. But what's all this got to do with buying a house, I hear you ask? You're Dan Newton, the French estate agent, not the eco-warrior. Well, it got me thinking. Whether you believe that climate change is totally natural or a real thing or some man-made conspiracy, that isn't the point of this video. The simple fact is the weather we are experiencing the last couple of years is pretty well unprecedented and is a sign that something is changing. And things aren't the same as they used to be 10, 20, 30 years ago. And that made me wonder, has the definition of the perfect property changed as well? Not just which region do we choose, but also the actual situation, the exact situation, the location of that property you are looking at. Because for years we've all been chasing the same dreams, either a lovely wooden chalet in the middle of a pine forest, or a riverside cottage with a trickle of water in the background, or a modern villa overlooking the Mediterranean with the pool in the front garden. And they are all perfect. Well, that is until they aren't. Now don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy any of these properties. I'm just saying we need to think a bit more about how we choose them and possibly take other factors into account as time evolves. Let's start with fires. I think they need to rethink planning policies for natural areas. Obviously, that is just my thoughts. What do you think? What about the new housing developments? We've got two sides to this one. One you have, for example, in Brittany, they are reducing the size of building plots down to 400 to 600 metres square, roughly. The houses are so close, you can literally pass a cup of sugar to your neighbour through the windows. And if you can pass a cup of sugar, that means flames can jump from one house to another. Is that a good thing? What about in other regions where they actually allow people to build new houses in natural areas? Personally, I love the idea, but if you're building a woodland area, see behind me here, things can go wrong. This isn't actually a house, this is a plot of land I've just come across as I was driving along the road. And by all looks of it, it was started by a campfire. But now, the fact is there, building houses in natural areas without taking the necessary protections, well, it's asking for problems if you ask me. Unless you think about it up front and make provisions for the different factors. Fire isn't the only issue either. Water is. Every summer now we hear about water restrictions somewhere in France. Admittedly more towards the south than the north, but even so, all over France. In certain parts of the south, they've even gone to the extent of cancelling or putting on standby until new orders any existing building permits. In some areas, you literally just can't build a new house. You can't extend a house. Not just for the amount of water needed for that building site, but also for the actual added population, which is going to put extra stress onto the water supply for years to come. Now, if your idea of living in France is sitting by a pool, sipping a chilled wine, looking out over the lavender fields, well, for the moment, it's certainly possible. But for how long? Once again, these are things people rarely thought about 10 years ago, but maybe they should start thinking about them today. And then there's flooding. I'm here on the banks of the Vézère River in Dordogne. Lovely summer's day. And to be honest, where I'm standing here now, this winter, I'll be underwater. Another example I wanted to give you was Montignac. I got this great photo of Montignac during the floods, and I thought I'd go back and actually film the exact same spot so you can see how it is today. Unfortunately, there's a big festival going on, so music and everything, so I can't do that for you, so you have to make do. Here, what it looks like now. Here, what it looks like during the floods. I've seen the lower part of the town flooded on several occasions. It's due to the actual snow melting further down the river in the mountains. Literally comes down full whack. And like I said, here on the Vézère River, a bit further up in Condar-sur-Vézère, I saw this winter, and literally the water would have been over my head. So just to remind you, that is where it is now. And when it came up over the space of about 6 hours. So rivers can be worrying, and you need to think about that. And that's only part of the story. More and more often we are seeing long periods of intense heat followed by torrential rain. But the problem is, with the weeks of the dry weather, the land is baked dry and solid. It just can't absorb the amount of water landing on it. So instead of soaking it up, it literally just runs off. And that's when flash floods can happen. And if even worse, mudslides. And one thing many people often overlook is that flooding doesn't necessarily come just from rivers. It can come from the hillside behind you. Of course, avoid living in a floodplain is common sense these days. But maybe we also should be thinking about replanting those hedges and the dry stone walls which zigzagged across the countryside, and which actually slowed down the water and let it actually soak into the earth where it was needed. I often feel very much that the old ways were the best. They knew what they're doing those days. It wasn't all to do with maximum turnover. It was about preservation. And another thing people don't often think about is the ground itself. Lots of homes in France actually sit on clay. And the trouble with clay is that by its nature it is relatively wet. But with more and more heat waves, it is contracting all the time as it dries out. And as it contracts, the earth around it cracks, and the houses above crack, whether that be walls, floors or foundations. We've all seen long diagonal cracks across facades of houses. Sometimes they've been there for decades. Quite often in the old stone houses, it was the mortar drying out which caused the crack to start with 200, 300, 400 years ago. But in more modern houses, be careful. It could be signs of a lot worse. Again, I am not saying do not buy a house in that region. There's millions of houses out there. There's millions of French people living in them. It's just be careful when you're looking at the property and think ahead. Once again, things we never thought about 10, 20 years ago. Then there's the risk that very few people talk about. The risk of rockfall. Now, everyone's heard about the permafrost melting in the mountains and rocks breaking off and causing massive great big rock slides down the mountain valleys. But something similar is happening in the lowlands as well. In many regions of France, and particularly the Loire Valley and the Dordogne area, There are limestone cliffs formed by the rivers millions of years ago, which have, for many years have been part of the landscape. The thing is, the combination of acid rain and heavy rain is eaten into that limestone, and then with the frost coming in winter, they're actually blowing that limestone apart, and we're getting more and more cases of big slabs of rock literally falling off a cliff. Sometimes we're talking about rocks weighing a couple of tons. Sometimes we're talking about rocks weighing several hundreds of tons. Now, before anyone panics, these are quite rare, but it does happen. I'm certainly not saying you should actually avoid any village with a limestone cliff nearby. Take the Rock Gajac, for example. Even if you don't recognise the name, you'll recognise the photos. It has been voted one of France's most beautiful villages many a time, and figures on most of the postcards of Dordogne. In 2010, this cliffside village had a very close call. A 320-ton block of limestone detached itself from the cliff literally just above the village. A large part of the village was evacuated, and the main road was closed for several weeks. A major stabilisation work needed to be carried out to make the area safe and livable again. And as it happens, as of I believe last summer, you can actually visit the cave castle in the cliff there, which has been closed for many a year. Now I'm standing here on the outskirts of Excideuil, a small town in Dordogne, and when I mean outskirts, I'm literally on the edge of the houses. There's a house behind me here, or behind you, a couple of houses down the road. And what has this got to do with climate? Well, this little cliff behind me here. If you were standing here in February 2024, you probably would have had the fright of your life. Literally a 5,000-ton block of limestone, one single block, literally toppled off this cliff onto the road. Thank God there was no cars, there was no victims, and it stopped just metres away from the closest house. The road was blocked for months while the technicians came in to check the rest of the cliff to make sure it was safe and to work out how to remove a 5-ton block of stone. And as a little side note, as I'm filming this, a lady just stopped to talk to me who lives in one of the houses behind me here, and she is actually moving out to go to somewhere else because she is built into the cliff and is worried about the cliff falling on her. And another factor we don't really think about is hail. During the mid-season, when the hot weather comes in either early or late, it can sometimes be followed by a hailstorm, which in the normal sense is nothing to worry about when they're the size of peas. But when they get to the size of golf balls, or in some cases tennis balls, that's a different story. These things, when they get big enough, can literally just punch a hole straight through a clay tile roof. Slate roofs tend to resist a little bit longer, but it does make you wonder, should we be thinking about corrugated steel roofs? I certainly hope not. One of the joys of France is driving through the old authentic villages with either their slate roofs or pantar roofs or Roman tiles. And if all that was to replace with corrugated, well, it's not the same, is it? Also, flat roofs might be something we need to think about. I know on new builds at the moment, they're actually doing quite a few flat roofs because it's fashionable. Well, it's probably cheaper as well as the main reason, but the fact is, heavy rain, heavy hail, heavy snow, they just become above ground swimming pools. Maybe some of those magnificent Lowe's roofs we see in the Périgord and the Lot region should be adopted. After all, they are pretty well solid rock. Another thought along those lines is carports and garages. Will they become less of a luxury and more of an obligation? Because after all, the idea of driving a €50,000 car home to park it up just to have it wrecked 10 minutes later by a massive hailstorm does make you wonder. And one last thing to mention on all this is insurance. Hardly a natural disaster, but very much climate related. because the house insurance prices are calculated by departments, and one thing they take into account are the actual claims which have been made, whether that be hail, whether that be clay, whether that be flood, whatever. And the more claims are in that department, the more expensive the house insurance. And in certain regions, they have been getting up to 13% increase in a year on their house insurance. And that is obviously spread out over everyone, whether you are directly concerned or not. So one thing might be good to ask when you're out looking at houses is, what is the house insurance like in that area? Besides preparing you for the actual prices, it will also give you a good guide on the actual situation. When you're buying a house, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There's what we call the ERP, or the état de risque et pollution, which, to be honest, by a lot of people is completely ignored. It's not the most exciting bedside reading, admittedly, but there is a lot of information in there. It will literally give you the history in your direct area of any natural disasters which have happened. And obviously we can't foretell the future, but what's in the past can give us a good idea of the risk factor involved. Now, before anyone says,
"That's it, Dan. You've convinced me. I'm not moving to France."
Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this is just a French thing. Obviously, it's happening the world over. Slight variations from continent to continent, I imagine, but the basics are there. So whether you're buying in France, Spain, Italy, America, Australia, wherever, you will be confronted with similar problems. And the main one being is that the climate is becoming less predictable. For years, some people's dream is to live in a house surrounded by woodland and no neighbours in view. Peace, nature, wildlife and privacy. But today, compared to 10, 20 years ago, would I think about it the same way? A house surrounded on all four sides by pine wood? Probably. Would I think twice about buying a villa on a hill overlooking the Mediterranean, where the Mistral can turn a small flame into a blazing forest fire of scrubland within minutes? Probably. 20 years ago, I don't think I'd even ask myself those questions. And what about the new housing developments? Would I think differently about that now? Probably. And should they still allow timber-framed houses to be built in southern regions where the actual risk of fire is greater than others? Probably. I'm not trying to give the answer to this. I'm just saying maybe we should be asking questions nowadays that we weren't asking a generation ago. But don't forget, during all this time, France is still one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It still offers an incredible lifestyle, some great food and wine, and history just around every corner. And for those of you coming from America, I mean real history. To give you an example, I own two, let's say, normal stone properties, nothing special. But my one in Brittany dates back to 1901. It's 125 years old. And one in Dordogne, not so sure about the date, but I'll guesstimate 1800s. So probably 250 years old, something like that. And that is why I love France. So with this video, hopefully I've made you think about things. Like I said, I don't have the answers. I don't think many people do. But we need to plan ahead. And when you're choosing a home, I think you need to think about other things other than whether it's got a fitted kitchen or whether the actual bedroom wallpaper suits you. We need to think about the larger scale of things. And if we do that, you should be okay for quite a while. So, what do you think? I'd love to hear your ideas on this one. Do you think we're having a run of exceptional weather? Or do you think it's just a big government plot? But more importantly, has it changed the ways you think about choosing a house? Well, after all that doom and gloom, if you are still thinking about buying a house in France, which I hope you are, feel free to scan the QR code in the top corner here. That'll give you a form which comes straight through to me. And if I can help you out at all, I'll do my best. I'm Dan Newton, the French estate agent. À bientôt.